Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Holly Ravenslood. I am the branch chief for the Energy and Policy Evaluation Branch of the Office of Community Services Division of Energy Assistance. On behalf of OCS, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, providing reminders for completing the fiscal year 2018 LIHEAP Performance Data Forms first module, Module 1 Grantee Survey. Today's webinar will have two presenters, Melissa Torgerson of Verb Associates and Dan Bausch of APPRISE. Next slide. Today's webinar has three purposes. First, the webinar will provide a brief refresher of Module 1 of the Performance Data Form, otherwise known as the Grantee Survey. All state grantees are required to complete the Grantee Survey each year as part of the federal LIHEAP reporting requirements. Second, the webinar will provide updates on the status of the FY18 Performance Data Form and the due date for submitting your reports. Finally, the webinar will highlight key things to remember and keep in mind to avoid common reporting issues. The audience for this webinar include LIHEAP coordinators and staff who have experience completing the Grantee Survey for prior fiscal years, as well as fiscal staff and others that assist with preparing and completing certain sections of the Grantee Survey. Today's webinar is the third of 4 different webinars that we are offering on completing the fiscal year 2018 performance data information. The first webinar, held in December, provided a detailed introduction and line-by-line overview of the Grantee Survey. The second webinar, conducted earlier this month, provided a complete overview of Module 2, the performance measures. Sorry, I'm chuckling because earlier this month, it's the 10th. Both of these are excellent resources that will be posted on the ACF training webpage and that APPRISE can provide to you as needed. As shown on the slide, the final webinar is planned for January 23rd. This webinar will be similar to today's webinar, except it will focus on reminders and things to keep in mind for completing the performance measure statistics. Our hope is that these training opportunities are helpful. Thank you for your time and joining us. Melissa?
Thanks, Holly. Good afternoon or morning to those of you on the left side of our nation. Today we're going to talk briefly about key information. The structure of this webinar is intended to be 30 minutes. The slides are available for download now. If you look on your menu bar for the Go-To webinar, you'll notice that there's a handout section and there's a PDF there that you can download now if you'd like. If you have a question, you're encouraged to ask questions as you have them in the questions box, and APPRISE will go ahead and review them as they're submitted, and we'll either respond to them at the end of the webinar if they're appropriate for the entire audience, or if it's perhaps a one-off question, or we've run out of time, you'll get an email response to your question. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll see kind of the control panel. If your sidebar is minimized, it's going to look just like this little navy rectangle on the right, and all you need to do is click the orange arrow to maximize the sidebar, and then you can just enter a question there for staff as we're moving along. Each slide also has a circle with a number in it, so if you'd like to reference a certain slide, those numbers are on every slide for you to reference. So just to give you, we kind of talk about this every webinar, but it's important, it bears repeating. The Performance Data Form is an annual report. All states and grantees, as well as the District of, all state grantees and the District of Columbia must submit this to HHS. There are 3 parts to the Performance Data Form: the Grantee Survey, which is Module 1, Module 2 being the LIHEAP performance measures, and Module 3 being optional performance measures. For those of you who have been around a long time, the Grantee Survey has been submitted by grantees since the 1980s, so many of you are already familiar with this portion of the form. The performance measures data was first required in the 2016 reporting cycle. Data are published in the annual LIHEAP report to Congress. They're also published in the LIHEAP Data Warehouse, which there's a link here so you can go back and access your history of data that you've reported in the past. And even more importantly, perhaps, it's used by OCS and others to respond to congressional and White House inquiries.
We did want to provide an update on the status of the fiscal year 2018 performance data form. The form is going to be due in OLDC at the end of this month on January 31st. And OCS is expected to issue an action transmittal soon with the official instructions. Right now, you can go into the online data collection system, OLDC, and you can initiate your 2018 form, save it, validate it, or submit it. And OCS has uploaded data to pre-populate specific fields in Module 1, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And you're encouraged to be preparing your data now to be able to submit your report later this month. So what has changed from last year? The good news is that there have not been any changes to the performance data form or to the Grantee Survey portion of the performance data form for 2018. The report requirements remain the same as for last year's fiscal year 2017 report. So that means you can go to the instructions that are available on the ACF LIHEAP webpage at that link and see the official instructions. And grantees are encouraged to review issues that were identified last year during the review of your grantee survey so that you can be able to check for those again and to address them. Now we're going to move into some reminders of the reporting rules for Module 1.
So the first is the same we give for all reports, and that is that it's important to report according to the instructions. We know LIHEAP is flexible as a block grant. It gives you freedom to design programs that are unique and diverse, but OCS has to report consistent information to Congress. And the instructions and the grantee survey itself are designed to report this uniform information on the sources of LIHEAP funds and the uses of LIHEAP funds. Therefore, we expect or have the expectation that grantees will review the instructions for guidance on how to correctly report each item, and this includes providing those instructions to whoever is completing your report, like IT staff or your analysis staff, your reporting analysis staff. And then we also expect folks to contact their OCS liaison or APPRISE when encountering challenges in reporting according to the instructions. So if things are a little bit different and you're trying to find a place to plug information in, but it doesn't quite fit in the form, we expect you to contact APPRISE or OCS. And Dan's going to give some examples of this.
These are two very common examples. Each state uses its own system and approach towards fiscal tracking and recording data. So the first example is your system might be set up to record information at the benefits level. So there could be a record for every instance that a benefit is issued for a household. But for the grantee survey, you're being asked to report information on all total funds available that were obligated, even if those funds were not expended. This is a concept we're going to talk about a little bit later in the webinar. But for the purpose of reporting according to the instructions, the important thing to remember is that you need to understand what the instructions are asking versus what your system might be set up to track. And then the second example is also a very common one, which is that for the grantee survey, all grantees are asked to report information that corresponds to the federal fiscal year, which is from October 1st to September 30th. So if you use a different fiscal year for your state, you're still asked to report information corresponding to that October 1st to September 30th time frame. You there, Melissa?
Yep, sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. The grantee survey includes a note section that allows grantees to explain any reported information that's out of the ordinary. So when there is something that doesn't quite fit or that you've had to kind of plug into a different area, we expect that you would use that note section. And anytime a warning is generated in OLDC or something needs clarification, you should err on the side of leaving a note. If there is anything about your program operation that requires explanation, we ask you to add a note, not just to explain warnings, but also to give us a better understanding of your reported data. We use these data in the tables and footnotes section of the annual report to Congress. So when your legislator looks at your data and compares it to other states, or maybe compares it to previous years, if there's not that note there, you may get a call saying, why is our program so different? Why are we having such different numbers? I don't understand this. So the more notes you can provide with your data to provide clarification, the less assumptions are made about the data that you're providing.
And here's two examples. The first example is providing a note that really communicates information and hopefully saves time in the long run. You may have a weatherization assistance program as part of your LIHEAP program, and as you know, the statutory limit for the portion of your funds that you can obligate for weatherization assistance is 15%. But you may have requested and received a waiver for your state that allows you to go above that 15% limit up to 25%. It's very helpful in the Grantee Survey when you report that dollar amount for weatherization to indicate that you received a waiver to exceed that 15% limit, because that's something that will be found in the check when we review your data. And then the second bullet is another example. In OLDC, there are warning messages that will appear if there's a potential error or something that we want to raise to your attention. An example of that is if your household report indicates that you served no households with heating assistance, but in your grantee survey you then go and put a dollar amount for funds obligated for heating assistance, you'd receive a message, and that would be a case where you could add a note to explain, for instance, that you obligated funds, but you're not going to expend those funds until the next fiscal year. So those are just two examples, but there's many others that we'll talk about.
So the Grantee Survey requires that grantees report using the best information available at the time of reporting for sources and uses of funds. And this is why the third rule is providing a consistent report with sources equals uses. It's not an audit report. To meet the reporting requirements, grantees need to use your data reporting system to identify and count funds for each LIHEAP component using fiscal tracking systems and program records. So when we talk about this, we're talking about a couple of different aspects. You should be able to account for the amount of funds received from OCS, and that would probably be in your overall grant management or fiscal tracking system. You're going to also need to track the amount of funds obligated. So when those funds came in, where were they kind of assigned or allocated based on each category? And then, as we'll talk about later, you're also going to need to track the average benefit, which is actually going to perhaps even be in a different system for each household. And so all of these things need to come from systems that provide this data. In order to help you consistently report sources with uses, we do have a lot of data validation and checks in OLDC, and I know some of you are familiar with these. They've become good friends. OLDC warning and error messages are the first kind of source of checks that you'll have, and I think I'm not sure if Dan will talk about that a little bit, but a warning will kind of just clue you in that there's something you need to check, and an error will actually not let you proceed in the report. But in addition to this, APPRISE does a further in-depth review of your data to just check and validate that the numbers you're reporting are consistent and make sense with one another. For example, the biggest, I think, key check is that the sum of amounts reported in Section 3, your sources of funds, equal the sum of amounts reported in Section 4, your uses of funds. And if any of you still balance your checkbook with all the online banking stuff going on, you know that that's basically what this is. Did the money that come in, how did you use the money that came in, and can you accurately report how you allocated that money to go out? We talk about, here's just kind of in the weeds, we ask that you report funding amounts rounded to the near wholest dollar to avoid OLDC warning messages. Dan?
Can you hear me?
Do we have you? Yep, we can hear you now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries.
The fourth reporting rule is to investigate and address any issues or questions. As Melissa was saying, we do an in-depth review of your report after you submit it. And in OLDC, there's those warning and error messages that are really meant to help you to be able to detect issues and resolve them. So once we've done your review, a review of your report, we'll reach out to you with any questions about your data or any concerns. And it's expected that you'd be able to review your data and to look back into your data records to answer questions. We're here to help you and to help you to be able to resolve those issues. So if anything comes up as you're preparing your report, you can reach out to us, and we will work to proactively help you to resolve those. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about data validation and checks.
Okay, so this is what we talked a little bit about earlier, that we do have validation checks programmed into OLDC. And although we don't like these, they really do help us get better information from you. And for those of you who have done this, you know that if you pay attention to these warnings and errors, you get fewer calls from APPRISE or your OCS liaison to follow up with questions on your report. Warning messages indicate data may be correct but require confirmation and additional explanation in the notes section. This is an important statement here. If you get a warning message and you've checked the data and it's right, it should be an automatic trigger that you need to include a note in the note section, because OCS or APPRISE will be calling you to find out why that warning is still existing. A fatal error message indicates inconsistent data that must be corrected before grantees are able to submit their grantee survey. And this is because it's mathematically impossible usually, or it just completely doesn't match something that you've said you do. And so you need to fix it before you move on. If a warning message appears, but you have an explanation for the warning and you've confirmed that the data is correct, once again, you should add a note addressing the warning. If a warning message appears but you don't know how to resolve it, contact APPRISE for assistance and we'll help you walk through that. If a fatal error occurs, it's the same kind of solution and you don't know how to resolve it, contact APPRISE and we'll work together to resolve the reporting issue so you can complete your report and submit it on time.
There are three types of checks we do that are described on this slide, and the examples are very useful examples that you can use to check your own report as you prepare it. The first type of check we do are internal consistency checks within the Grantee Survey. Melissa's already talked about the importance of total uses and total sources being equal. Section 3 is total sources. Section 4 of the Grantee Survey is total uses. So we check those to make sure they're equal and the information is consistent between them. The second type of checks is comparing information to your model plan. Prior to fiscal year 2018 getting underway, you prepared and submitted your model plan to HHS, and that includes information about the LIHEAP components you're planning to operate during the fiscal year and the income eligibility criteria you're using. So an example of a check we do is, does the maximum annual dollar income amount that you reported for a 4-person household in your grantee survey correspond to the eligibility standard that you specified you'd be using in your model plan. And then the third type of check is comparing to other reports. And we're going to talk about this example in a few slides, but we do check that the amounts you report for funds carried over into the fiscal year, and the funds that you're going to carry over into the next fiscal year are consistent with your other Grantee Survey reports and carryover and reallotment reports. Once you submit your report, as I indicated, we will email you with any issues or questions. And our intention is to be able to help you to submit your final report. Once your report is confirmed to be complete, your liaison will accept the report in OLDC, and then that information will be used in the LIHEAP report to Congress and the LIHEAP data warehouse. If you later identify a correction or a change is needed, you can submit a revision in OLDC. If you're new to the Grantee Survey or new to LIHEAP, there are many resources that have been developed to assist you, and this is a good example of one of the resources that was developed, I believe last year. It's a check before you submit document, and it has a checklist format that you can use to review your Grantee Survey. And if you can answer yes to all the questions, then your Grantee Survey is ready to be submitted. Okay, now we're going to look at some of the most common reporting issues and reminders of how to check for them.
Okay, so the first big one for reminders and common issues is reporting obligations, not expenditures. So Section 4 asks you to report on the uses of LIHEAP funding that were available to your state in 2018. This includes all funds and awards that were obligated for use during the federal fiscal year 2018. And the term obligation is determined by your state, but in most cases, actually, this includes money that was allocated to your subgrantees or placed into or promised or allocated as part of contracts. And in many cases, obligated funds aren't actually expended until after the end of the year. So we're not looking at expenditures. We're looking at where did you obligate these funds? What did you assign them to? I would recommend all of you go to your fiscal or grant management staff and ask them what obligation means in your state. Uses of funds should not include funds that were not obligated by the end of 2018 and will be returned to OCS, and funds that were obligated in 2017 even if they were expended during 2018. So once again, we're not talking about expenditures, we're talking about the money that was given to you by OCS or awarded to you by OCS in 2018 and how you obligated those funds. If the second reporting issue is consistency with model plan and household report, remember all of these reports are linked to one another, and so it should tell a consistent story across all of your reports. So if you said at the beginning of the year that you were going to provide a particular kind of assistance in your model plan, we should see that in your household report, and we should also see you be able to report information about that type of assistance in your grantee survey. So if you said you were going to do a cooling report in your model plan or a cooling program in your model plan, we'd expect to see a cooling program in your household report with number of households served, and we'd expect in the grantee survey to see the total funds obligated for cooling assistance in 2018, the average household benefit, and the maximum annual dollar income for a 4-person household for cooling assistance. The maximum annual dollar income amount should be consistent with the standard you specified for eligibility in your model plan. And if there are nuances to this, we would expect or ask you to please include notes in the report. Dan?
Okay. Reminder number 3 is related to carryover amounts. So carryover is an important concept to report on in the Grantee Survey. As you know, the LIHEAP statute allows states to carry over up to 10% of funds payable to the state for a given fiscal year for obligation in the following fiscal year. So there are actually two different carryover amounts that get reported in your grantee survey. The first is funds that come from the prior fiscal year and were carried over into the current fiscal year. This gets reported as a source of LIHEAP funds. And for this year's fiscal year 2018 grantee survey, you'd be reporting all unobligated fiscal year 2017 funds that were carried over for obligation into fiscal year 2018. So OCS has tried to help you with this field by pre-populating it using your prior year fiscal year 2017 report. But that field is editable, and it should be checked and verified against your other information. So if you do need to, if you check this information and you need to update it, you should also go into your prior fiscal year 2017 grantee survey and your carryover and reallotment report and submit revisions that make those amounts consistent across three reports. So you reported this amount in your fiscal year 2017 grantee survey. You report it in your fiscal year 2017 carryover and reallotment report as what you intended to carry over, and now you're reporting it in your grantee survey as the amount that did get carried over into 2018. Okay, so that's the first carryover amount you report. And then the second carryover amount you report is the amount of fiscal year 2018 funds that were not obligated and that you carried over for obligation into federal fiscal year 2019. This is a use of in the use of funds category, and this amount also should be consistent with the equivalent amount that you report in your 2018 carryover and reallotment report. That report is filled out in August initially, and as you prepare your grantee survey, now that federal fiscal year 2018 is done, you may realize there's an update that's needed to that amount. But one of the checks we do is to make sure those two amounts are consistent. So we ask you to go back and submit a revision if you need to update that original 2018 carryover and reallotment report amount. Melissa?
Yes, hi. So if your state does not provide, actually this is reminder 4, let me start with that, including notes on program details. And we talk a lot about including notes, so clearly this is something that's pretty important. If your state does not provide funds for crisis assistance but expedited heating or cooling assistance, make sure that you include a note that indicates this so that we know, we understand that there's a crisis component within your regular heating or cooling assistance. If you report funds for other crisis benefits, make sure you include a note about the kind of assistance you provided. If you provided non-bill payment assistance using heating assistance or cooling assistance, include a note that indicates this. If you received a waiver to use funds above the statutory limit for weatherization, include this in a note. And finally, if you use funds for program-related information technology expenditures, please include that amount in a note. And for those of you who are kind of still thinking about this or not sure, we encourage you to go back to the step-by-step webinar slides. This tells you exactly where to put that. But you can see that all of these are kind of those gray areas in the report, and in every situation and circumstance when there's a gray area, we expect to see a note in your report. So finally, we're going to go through some resources really quickly and final reminders for you. Once again, this report is due in OLDC on January 31st. This includes both the Grantee Survey and performance measures. OCS is expected to publish an action transmittal with the instructions. As Dan mentioned, there have been no changes, however, to this form. So if you're looking for instructions, you can look at the 2017 to help you through until OCS publishes this action transmittal. Keep in mind that the performance data form must be entered, saved, certified, and submitted all in OLDC, and that can be a lengthy process. So give yourself enough time to do all of that. And there are no changes to this report, as we mentioned earlier. It's the same as the 2017 form.
This slide has 4 resources you can look at for understanding the Grantee Survey. That second bullet's very important. That's the instructions for last year's form. That has all the detailed information about each line. And on the bottom is a resource that is available on the LIHEAP Clearinghouse to help states with being able to anticipate the amount they might carry over in funds. So we encourage you to look at these resources.
So I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but as you're getting into OLDC and using it, this is information about where you can get help to enter data or to log in and enter your data into OLDC. There's both a link for logging into the system as well as a help link and help desk numbers. And finally, there's a number of resources here. Throughout the webinar, we've said to please contact us if you have questions. We've probably helped another state with your same questions, so don't hesitate to call and ask us before spending a lot of time trying to figure something out. Just give us a call or an email, and we will help you through that. Your liaison can help with program components. The APPRISE team can help you with reporting details, and the Grant Center of Excellence will help you with getting into OLDC.
Okay, we're about at time. We have one question, which is, we use the same pot of money for our main winter crisis program and for furnace repair and replacement. How do we handle reporting this? I think, Melissa, I think the goal is to be able to report the funds that are obligated for the different types of assistance. So first, you might talk to your fiscal staff to see if they've determined the total amount that's obligated for each of those, for the winter crisis or for the furnace repair and replacement. And then you may need, if it's unclear, you might need to report the total combined amount and include a note that talks about that. Is there anything else you would have to say on that, Melissa?
No, I mean, I think we stated earlier that if you're using winter assistance, and that includes non-bill payment benefits, or heating assistance, and that includes non-bill benefits, to include a note. So as Dan mentioned, if you can include a detailed note that says, here's the amount of funds that were used for furnace repair and replacement, that's great, but you do need to add a note regardless that says some of the heating assistance funds were used for furnace repair and replacement. If you need further help, give us a call and we'll help walk you through that.
Yep. And then the last question is just, is this webinar recorded? Yes, it is recorded, and it will be posted on the ACF LIHEAP training webpage probably next week or later this month. If you need the slides, you can download them on the site as well. Okay, well, thank you for your time today and for attending. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us directly. And we will have our next webinar on the performance measures modules, brief reminders, on January 23rd, and you will be receiving the information for that webinar to register later today. Thank you very much, and have a great day.